600 AD, a sweeping change is happening over the earth. In the Middle East, there is born a man who will then take over the entire world in terms of religion and influence. His influence is only 600 years after the first man who would do this, Jesus Christ of Nazareth. He is Muhammad. But something people don't know is how many black people lived in the Arabian areas before Islam even got started. These were not slaves. These were not captives. A lot of them were people abandoned from African empires, and a lot of them were people accepted. Some of them were called the Black Crows, because of course they looked somewhat different than the Mesopotamian types that had been left behind, or the Indo-European types that had fused with the population of the Mesopotamians. These Africans would represent groups like the Egyptians, the Eritreans, the Somalians, the Ethiopians, and in some very rare cases, the Zanj. The Zanj as a population would grow only later, but before this, there were several, and I say several, of famous, not just the population, famous black pre-Islamic Arabs who lived inside of Arabia. In fact, one of the places in the world that was easy to shift to Arabic or Islam was Somalia, though in the beginning it was a Christian nation. We can start with one that makes it very obvious that even before the Islamic Empire, there was black people, Ayman. And of course, this woman was around before Muhammad was born. In fact, she said she looked at the mother of Muhammad's stomach, and it shone, a light shone upon it. And that's why she said she knew that he was the chosen one before he was even born. Now, that's fine. That's a story that she told. But this proves that there was black people prior to Islam. I'm not going to talk about her because her story, I've already talked about it, and I might link it in the description. The first person I want to talk about is someone who looks like a character from the movie 300. The first one we will start with is Antara ibn Shaddad al-Absi, otherwise known as Antar. He was a pre-Islamic knight. Now, here's the thing. He did start off as a slave and gained his freedom through his military efforts. His father was an Arab and his mother was an Ethiopian. There were plenty of other black Arabs at the time, meaning they were half black, half Arab, but they were considered Arab at the time because that's not how race worked back then. These multitudes of people did not always come through slavery. Like I said, a lot of them were left over or were part of a empire that had conquered some of these regions like Yemen. But in this case, what we're looking at is something very, very special because there's many writings about this person specifically, meaning we don't have to guess at what he looked like. We don't have to guess at what he said or anything else. Like the other person I showed you who played music in Arabia, he was called, and I'm going to say this only once, Agriba al-Arab, Arab crows. This is a very typical word they used whenever they wanted to refer to black Arabs. This guy was born, as I said before, in 525 AD before Muhammad was even around. He won his freedom through various acts of war with several other states. Now, firstly, I have to mention that some of these people who are around at the same time that he was are, for example, the Mahas or the Nubians of Egypt, quote unquote Nubians of Egypt, the Banu Ups. This was a group in Arabia and around other parts of East Africa. And then there's the Bedouins. The Bedouins tend to have 17% of black African ancestry. He went to war, his father was impressed, and he was allowed to be a free person. And this is what is written about him. But he was no victim. In fact, at a time when not a lot of people were literate, he was. And he wrote a couple of poems. This is one piece of one of these poems. Behind their veils glimmer apparently, as if the sharp blade of a sword stabbing my heart fiercely. If they are unsheathed, the brave man becomes coward readily, and his eye holes turn ulcerated, replete with the tears shed heavily. I wish God would quench my uncle the cup of death bitterly. His hands turn pulsated after his fingers were amputated totally. As he sends me to the death, the escape is hardly. He promises me in what I am desirous of eventually. Abla has said farewell to me when I intended the departure. She was some sure that she would not see me on future. She wept and said, how do you do if you are naked? What will happen then if you are on the wide desert settled? By your honor, I did not try any comfort is accessible. My passion toward thee, love, on all my life is unchangeable. You, cousin, be sure of my sincere cordiality. You, lover, be soft on pleasure without anxiety. I said to her, hereinafter, should I have either alive or dead, even if the sharp sword impede my way, I shall go ahead. We were born for the sake of this love formerly, therefore I think this love will not die, since it is eternally. Oh, you, the optimist place, really. I come back alive. Then I see on its both sides the annual flowers revive. I wish my eye saw both hillocks and the adjacent lively location. However, it can see the rest of the people in that virgin situation. Then we live along with on our favorable places, do not separated. In those certain virgin sides we would be happy and delighted. By God, thou the breeze with the oily ben odor are scented. Reach Abla and inform her about the places had I reached. O lightning, inform her on this morn my greeting, as well as any place had I rest there and my dwelling. O chanting birds, if I die, mourn near by my tomb right after. Lift my soul with thy wings to be in heaven settled forever. Weep and mourn about who dies aggrievedly without reason. Do not gain only the lover's torture and the pain of separation. And you horses cry about your horsemen abundantly. This who throws oneself into battlefields dusts bravely. You should be acquainted, soul, to the humiliation, suffering thy passion. You may be tied with heavy bonds of a familiar slavery fashion. Never will I cry if my fate has come manifestly. Maybe I mislead then shed tears spontaneously. It is not pride that I state my bravery or severity on each assembly, while my fame everywhere is celebrated widely by platonic love. Do not blame me, and stop thy talkativeness. Blame never has benefit or any dependable seriousness. How can I endure the unbearable patience of this lover, since the passionate love enkindles my ribs moreover? That poem tells a lot about Antara's life, and since it was written by him, it tells you some deep thoughts that he had about Abla, his cousin, who he was in love with and he used to meet. And after he got his freedom from his father, well, before and after he got his freedom from his father, he wanted to marry his cousin, and his father allowed him because he was free. His mother had always resented him a little bit for reasons. You'd have to read some of his other poems, which I hope I link, in order to understand why. But this man, who had lived a pretty complicated life, and probably the life of a lot of other Afro Arabs, would have to endure, thrive, and be famous because his dad was also famous warrior in one lifetime. That was the typical life for some of these people. While the man I just mentioned was seen as a hero, even installed miracle in his narrative, the next person I'm about to mention, a black Axumite, would be seen as a sort of villain because he tried to destroy the Kaaba in Mecca. But first, we have to go back. Ethiopia and the Sabaean kingdom in Yemen have a history together. In fact, both of them have narratives about each other. Of course, the narrative in Ethiopia is about the Queen of Sheba, and the narrative in Yemen is about the solar disk and the Egyptians. But leaving this, we go further into the future, and what we find is the Hammerites. The Hammerite kingdom took over the Sabaean kingdom, and the Sabaean kingdom fell under it. In 530 AD, the Axumites decided that it was high time they ruled, and so they sent someone to try and take over, Abraha. Now, Abraha was a skilled warrior and would eventually take over Yemen, but the way he did it was very skilled. So there was a previous viceroy named Dunois, and this viceroy was Jewish, and he committed suicide. Abraha decided that this was the perfect opportunity for him to strike, and he did. This would have been a simple exchange of power, but he withheld tribute to Caleb, and Caleb did not appreciate this. This then led to a fight in which Abraha got his face cut and got the epithet or got the word Scarface. Power is intoxicating, and clearly Abraha was drunk off of the power, but he was not stupid. What he did then, remember, Caleb is the person who sent him to Yemen to take over, giving him 100,000 men. Caleb sent more people to fight him. Ariat is one of them. But Caleb defeated Ariat. In fact, it's thought that Ariat's men killed Ariat and joined Abraha. Now, Caleb had to just accept him, even though he wasn't willing to pay his fair share. After that, the son of Caleb, would be paid, but a way smaller amount. So that kept the kingdom together, the empire together, though you could say it was two different empires under Ethiopian rule. Early inscriptions set up by Abraha show the military campaign and also call him the king of Saba, Sabaean Empire now being ruled by an Ethiopian. And it also shows his expansion efforts. But the latest one shows how he had settled into his new empire all cozy by building dams and other educational things, including churches. Remember, at this point the Ethiopians were Christians and Islam was yet to be heard of. After the death of Abraha, the person who would take over was Yakum ibn Abraha, Yakum, the son of Abraha, and he would not last very long since his brother went and acquainted himself with the Sassanid Empire so that he could take over. His brother, Musruk ibn Abraha, was taken out as well, and he became the final ruler of the Aksumite dynasty of that area. Now, there's too many ways of the story being told for me to go into detail, but you could see that in some of the books, they show it very differently in terms of how the people responded. But this is the version that I will tell, a pure, clean, non-emotional version. This is a image made by the Persians depicting an arrow killing Musruk. This Ethiopian has made it inside a lot of Islamic books, even though he himself was a Christian. And he has been mythologized to the point where some of the things that, well, let's just say a weapon given to Muhammad was apparently given to him by a daughter of Abraha. And remember, this is the guy who's mythologized to have wanted to destroy the Kaaba, which is a now Islamic symbol. But, back in the day, it used to be just a symbol for pre Islamic religion. And of course, this Christian didn't care about that. But one provocation too much, and things go left. He did live a full life. It seems like he didn't peter out like most of these other people do. Now, does this speak of a realistic life? Not the part of the mythology with Islam, but it does speak to how many black people existed pre-Islam. And by the way, they get venerated one after the other. I've only mentioned three in this video. There's a lot of them. I can't even tell you the number right now because I would be lying if I said it was countable for me based on what I know.